Hello, everybody. It's Justin Case of American Newscape, rejoining our friend Scott Dudley for American Consciousness. Hello, Scott. Welcome back to American Newscape.
Justin, it's great to be here. Thank you. Thank the listeners. Always fun to kind of dial stuff in once a week and talk about it and get our heads around things that may on the surface appear to be easier or more simple or just more black and white. You know, it's like every time I dive into something, I'm like, oh, this is super gray.
Well, it is, and you and I bring unique perspectives to it, and I always learn something. So we don't know what we're going to have until we put it in the oven and bake it.
No, we sure don't. All right, so last week we were talking about information and how, to sort out misinformation, disinformation, triangulate your sources, don't listen to just one source of information because you can't really count on anybody anymore. So, but what came up was the whole process of what to call stuff, labeling.
Right.
And I think you leaned in on that and said, with great wisdom, that'd be a great show. So
Might be. Yeah, we'll find out, huh?
well, and so all week long, Ken has been digging around. I took it to the dog park. True story. The first gold record of several that my father ever received was from a song called Signs. Signs, everywhere the signs. And so, like, as I've been thinking about it, it's like that song just keeps popping up in my head now. And he got gold records for songs I didn't really like, but I always liked the song Signs. So,
Well, it was a classic sign, certainly, or song for its time, and it still applies today.
it really did. How about people make assumptions based on labeling? And I thought that's where we go today. And then I took it to the dog park and stuff got really strange. One more random story to tell before we kick into this. When I was a struggling young adult, as opposed to a struggling older adult like
Right.
now, and so many different ways we can struggle, right?
Absolutely.
I went to one of those like food giveaway things that they have occasionally in different places, and this was a guy who was close with the farmer people, and you'd have to listen to like a 10-minute sermon, and then he'd fill up basically a grocery cart full of extra food that he'd been able to scrape up from who knows where during the week. And I would come home and I'd give it to all my neighbors, and I cream it. I'd eat the stuff I liked, and I'd give all the rest of it to other people, and that was fine. It worked really well. One time he had these big boxes of cans without labels.
Yeah.
And I'm like, yeah, sure, I'll take a couple boxes of that. And so I had like 60 cans that did not have any labels on them. And it became like some sort of roulette of what you're going to eat, because you never knew. And I was committed. I'm one of those, stubborn people. So I'm like, if we open this, we're going to eat it. I don't care what it is. And unless it's not dog food or something, and so it was an amazing experience of not being able to anticipate the meal, opening it up and going, oh, we're having potatoes tonight, or oh, it's carrots, or oh, it's lima beans, really,
Mustard.
again.
We used to, in a previous life when I worked in the grocery store in the 70s, you could not sell, even if you knew what was in that can, you could not sell to the public an unlabeled can. So we would collect them because those were the old paper labels, and they would get hot and come off, and they would just come off,
Yeah,
and once a year we would have an in-house, employees only auction of those cans. 1 cent, 2 cents, 3 cents, and it was a great adventure for us.
I would hope if you're in the grocery business, you've got an eye for the size of the can, and you can say, well, that's either going to be beans or
Well, you don't.
That's a Campbell soup can. I know them a mile away.
Right, right. It might be tuna, might be dog food. We just don't know. So,
Right.
right. Well, labels and that song really distracted me because that was a remarkable song, and you talked about people labels via perception, and perceptions can create false labels also.
Oh man, when I tossed this to the dog park, my head started spinning. The first thing I got was institutional labels and how necessary they are for institutions to function, but then how complicated they got. And the example given was attention deficit disorder. And so if a person is labeled that, that changes their life. And maybe in a really positive way because maybe they get the supportive services that they need, but maybe in a fairly pejorative way where that person then becomes part of the, like the DEI crowd, somebody who's going to need special accommodations to get hired. There's always going to be a non-ADHD person competing with them in the workplace. And now with that label, and they have to carry that around, in their little backpack of records, it may be harder for them to be successful. And so my head was already spinning. And then this person said, but that doesn't begin to describe the problem. The problem is you could have attention deficit hyperactivity disorder, ADHD, and be diagnosed. You could also have attention deficit hyperactivity disorder and not be diagnosed. You can believe yourself to have attention deficit hyperactivity disorder. Oh man, I am so ADD. God, I should have been there on time. I don't know what happened. I got distracted. Squirrel, squirrel. And then you start self-identifying and self-labeling, and it may or may not be true.
Yeah.
In terms of a literal, refined, classic diagnostic sense. And
Well,
diagnoses themselves may or may not be true.
well, absolutely. And, too often, first, I believe everybody has a touch of ADD. Everybody.
Well, everybody has attention, right?
Yeah.
So
And every
learning
once.
learning how to drive it, learning how to manage the beast is we're all challenged with that. And we live in a world that doesn't want us to have some sort of dial it in abilities. It wants us to keep jumping around every second.
Well, and if we roll back to institutions and talk about maybe agencies, there's sometimes can be financial benefits for checking a box, even for public education. There's a financial benefit for checking a box. Scott, when you and I grew up, there wasn't a child on Ritalin. Now they hand it out like chiclets.
Free and appropriate public education, right?
Right.
And so once you use diagnostic frameworks to support people who may need those supports, you open up various financial incentives, and those financial incentives may get out in front of the support of the kid. So now it's no longer potentially that support that's the critical thing. It's that once I identify this kid as a person who needs additional support for a free and appropriate public education, I can bill for it.
Right. 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 Absolutely. So, you know, we have to be we have to be careful. First, we shouldn't be labeling anybody. Nobody deserves to be labeled.
Well, but the flip side of it is, and this is where it gets goofy, is that people who need the label to either validate themselves. I mean, I've known people who were depressed their whole life, and I'm not a big labeling person. Trust me on that. but I've known people who were depressed their whole lives, and they were like walking around feeling really, really bad about not knowing what the problem was. And the minute somebody said to them, who had the authority to say so, based on what you've told me, based on the questions, based on how you're doing and handling life, you've got major depressive disorder. There was like a big burden got lifted off their back, and they were able to actually address it and recover. So it's like there's this paradoxical sense where, sometimes it could be really a burden. You've been labeled with this thing that you're going to have to carry around forever. Other times it can be like a gift, and
Well,
it's really hard to sort that out.
well, you're right. There is a big segment of society that needs validation of everything. How many acquaintances have we known in our past that their girlfriend boyfriend broke up with them, and the person that was broken up with needs validation. I need to know
Are we
why.
supposed to raise our hand on this one, or
Well,
that wasn't a personal question?
it's just always amazed me. It was this person is
What did I
broken.
do? What did I do?
Right, right,
I was there. I was doing my best. I was thought I was like your soulmate.
right.
What did
And
I do?
well,
I,
and those
that's not a
people,
weird spot. Pretty
and
common.
yeah, but we've seen people that demand that validation, and if they don't get that validation, they fly off the handle. Now they become an endangerment to society.
They get recklessly angry and reactive.
Hmm. Absolutely, absolutely. So, it's such a dance, and I still believe we should not label others. Now, if somebody wants to label themselves, they can. Just they shouldn't expect me to accept their label.
Or well, and I can accept it to the extent that's what they want. That's the label
Yeah,
they have self-identified with. Doesn't
right,
mean I have to necessarily believe it or subscribe to. For us in the business, the term addict was lesson learned. So 20, 25 years ago, people come in and they'd say, I'm using heroin every day, twice a day, whatever, and you'd say you're addicted to heroin, you're an addict. And as we grew up a little bit, we learned that that wasn't really ours to gift.
right,
So we weren't really. It wasn't fair for us to gift the label. And so we'd be sitting in a group of people say, well, it sounds like that's not really working for you. It sounds like you may have substance abuse problems. And because you're in jail or because you're on probation or because your kid got taken away or whatever. And then they could say, well, yeah, it's okay, this is practical. Let's begin to work on it. And they could come in the next day to a group setting and say, hi, I'm here because I'm an addict. And you wouldn't derail that because you're allowed to call yourself whatever you want. And you wouldn't
right.
even, backdoor and say, well, you're not really an addict. If you want to call yourself an addict, you're an addict in our business. But a good practitioner in our business doesn't throw around that label unless they're talking about themselves.
Well, exactly, exactly. It's and we all know whatever substance we put in that grouping of things that can be abused. The human beings all react to it differently. I mean, we've all known people that were alcohol, well, not alcoholics, that drank way too much, and one day they gave it up and didn't bat an eye. Their neighbor might abuse it and have a chemical dependency, and it's a whole different ball game, even with heroin.
Well, it is, and there are some drugs that are let's say, um, physiologically habit forming. If
Correct.
you don't put the substance in your body gets mad at you and starts yelling. You know, and nicotine and alcohol and heroin are all pretty good examples of things that tend to make your body pretty mad at you if you cut it off,
Right.
and
Right.
especially if you've been doing a lot of it on a regular basis. Other things are more psychological, and so you stop, and your body's like whatever, but your head's like, I lack motivation. I don't know what to do. I feel depressed now. A pain is really bad, or a lot of different kind of responses to that, and some are indeed both. So ultimately, it is a really interesting dance, and as you suggest, one person's habitual behavior that is problematic, that could be termed addiction if they chose to do that, is another person's long-term chronic abuse.
Right.
And they've gotten in plenty of trouble for these things. But when they stop, when they wake up one morning and say, you know what, I'm tired of screwing my life up, then they don't suffer the kind of recovery issues that a person who was more habitually stuck on something would. Does that
Well,
make sense?
well, it does, and there's a lot of different programs out there. We all grab 12 step because we're familiar with it, but that may not work for some. But there may be other programs that do.
Oh yeah, climbing Mount Recovery. It's and the problem is that many times if you've climbed Mount Recovery, it's a really arduous climb. If you've climbed it, you tend to believe that the pathway you took is the pathway, and it's amazing how many pathways there are. I mean, there's actually at the base of Mount Recovery, there's actually a top secret elevator that only like 4 people have ever found that takes you right up to the top, and you didn't do anything but push a button, and all of a sudden you're good. And other people, it's like one step forward, 2 steps back. Some people are blazing their own trail. The 12-step trail is a hard trail, but it's well trodden.
Yeah.
They've got guides posted, like at various rest points saying, hey, you're 5 steps up. If you've got 7 more steps, you can be the top. You know, so there are a lot of different ways of doing this, but that labeling part of it becomes real critical because ultimately you can make or break a person by what you call them and how and to what extent they believe you when you call them something.
Well, that harkens back to categorizing and putting, trying to put everybody in the same category or the preferred category or the downtrodden category, and it's just not that simple.
It's not that simple, and but at some level, at some aspects, it may be necessary, and that's where, like I said, when I took this to the doc, I thought I was going to get libtards and rethugs, and that was going to be it, and we could just spin around on calling people names and how that's not cool. But it immediately tracked into stuff that was a lot more complex.
Well, if we look what happened to comedy in the last, stand up comedy in the last 5 years, and a lot of pushback, a lot of resistance, a lot of anger. I mean, a lot of anger from all sides.
Well,
Why?
there's a rule, and we're now enforcing this rule, and it can be thought of as politically correct or it can be thought of as whatever. But the bottom line is, if you want to be funny, punch up, punch up. Don't punch down. You can make fun of your stuff, your gender, your ethnicity, the way you talk, the stuff you buy, or you can make fun of people who are farther up the power ladder. That's cool. That's funny. That's good. As it turns out, if you go back 20, 30 years, people were making fun of really marginalized people because they were easy targets. Everybody could laugh about it because very few people associated as being that person. And I think over time, what we found out as it got safer, right, was that, oh, I've got friends. Oh, I've got family. Oh, I don't think those people should be made fun of because I love them. And as a left-handed person, I want to say that I was probably one of the first groups on this boat because I could pass for right-handed. Unless people are actually watching me write or eat, I don't self-identify. I don't have a shirt saying I'm left-handed. But in the 1950s, when we were the spawn of the devil, the rate of left-handedness in the United States was 3%, a little bit less. In the 1960s, mid 1960s, when Sandy Koufax showed the world that left-handers were pretty badass, um, the amount of left-handed people went up to 15, 16%. I had to fight for the when they handed out scissors at the beginning of school. Like I had to make sure I was in line in the beginning of the line. Otherwise, there was only 1 or 2 pairs of left-handed scissors, and I would be butchering anything I had to cut for the rest of the term. I actually learned how to cut well with right-handed scissors using my left hand, which is a really hard technical skill to learn. But I
Wow.
figured it out because there were so many times where it was like, well, we don't have any more. Figure it out.
Wow. And that's something I never even knew existed. I just thought scissors were scissors.
Oh, dude, left. So if a left-handed person uses the right-handed scissors, they fold the paper. They crease the paper, but it doesn't cut because the pressure of the hand of the thumb and the fingers doesn't work right to create that.
Wow. No, wow. No
There you go.
wonder. So that's where wrong-handed came from. You were wrong-handed.
Well, and not only that, but every household appliance, motor vehicles. There's a reason that the accident rate for left-handed people, and the reason we die a lot younger on average. I'm playing the odds here. Is because the world is designed, everything's built for people who are right-handed. So we're always lopping off our fingers or crashing into things because our natural left-handedness leads us into backwards ways of dealing with things.
Okay. 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 And I always noticed, and I'm not labeling, that left-handed people tended to be more creative. Maybe that's a
Well,
survival technique.
it potentially, absolutely, and it would be reinforced. But there's also brain science. So we've got hemispheres in our brain, and our right hemisphere, which controls the left side of our body. So if we're left-handed, some of us who are left-handed are still left brain dominant. Others of us who are left-handed are actually right brain dominant. And that side is the side of language, poetry, music, all the cool stuff, basically. Whereas the left side of the brain is spatial relations, it's math, it's uh, following rules, it's all the kind of organized stuff. And so ultimately, it could be that left-handed people are more creative. But it's certainly, one of the things is true. Left-handed people are the only ones in their right minds.
Well, that would be a perception, I believe. But you talk about dominance, right hand, left hand. We also have that in our eyes. And when I was coaching baseball, the first thing we would do with all players was determine if they were left eye or right eye dominant. Because as a baseball hitter, you want your dominant eye forward.
Forward. Yeah, that makes sense.
And
How
I
would you
took,
determine? Would you like throw something at him, and if you threw it from one side and they didn't catch it, it hit him in the head?
well, you could
That's
do
like,
that. You could do that. That's one way you could do it. But you can hold a finger about 4 inches in front of your nose, look
okay.
at it with both eyes,
Hmm.
close one eye, and if it moves, that's not your dominant eye.
They both moved.
Well, that's that ambidextrous thing, Scott. But that's how you can tell. And if they were had been batting with their dominant eye back, that was over. If I was coaching them, they were going to have to learn how to hit, which we had drills to help them do that, to put that dominant eye forward, and it made a big difference. So this plays into lots of things. I mean, lots of things in life.
I throw right-handed because that was how people taught me. They just kept putting the ball in my right hand. They wouldn't let me do it any other way. I am a switch hitter, and I hit for power left-handed and for average right-handed. So my switch hitting wasn't. I didn't have a dominant side as a switch hitter. I had like two different skill sets.
Yeah. Well, that would have been me too as well. So, all right, but back to labels. So what else did you learn from the dog park? You said they were all wound up. What was peculiar or what was interesting to you that they came up with?
It it was well because what was interesting was the as you go from institutional labels, the kind of official labeling stuff that, and I was thinking about, I was every job title I've ever had was a label, and it
Hmm.
had all these rules and behaviors associated with it. So I actually really thought about that for a long time. But as you go from this institutional definition of what counts as a label and why it's there and how it developed over time, why you certainly could never live without it, um, and get to the individual labeling, where a person has certain autonomy in terms of selecting who they are and which labels they want to push forward, basically, because they don't, you know, just because I'm left-handed doesn't mean that's how I'm going to open up. I mean, I may open up a conversation saying, "Hey, I'm a Gemini with a Virgo moon and a Capricorn ascendant." You know, that may be my flavor of the day or whatever. So you've got this individual autonomy, and you've got this institutional rigidity, and which ultimately isn't as fail safe as we know. We've talked about it. It isn't as fail safe as it could be. And in between, you've got you've got amateur hour. You've got people who are more than happy to label you,
Yeah.
and it's not in any sort of scientific way.
No, and some of those people get up in the morning and they're going to label everyone they come across because that's what they do. They're labelers. Let's call them labelers.
Well, and we do that to sort out our own reality. I mean, I'm going to pick a hot button issue, but the one that came up at the dog park, and it comes up every once in a while in the dog park, is gender identity. And so there are people in the dog park who need a version of reality where there are boys and girls, and there aren't any. There's nothing in between. It's an either or situation. You're either boy or girl, and that's the end of the story. And it doesn't matter, what's in your head, but and more importantly, it doesn't matter what's in your body. So when you say, well, that's a really interesting way of seeing the world, what do you do with the 8 different types of biological intersex where people have a variety of different chromosomal things going on that lead to a variety of different physical expressions? What do you do with those people? They're neither nor, and that's a labeling issue. I mean, ultimately, those people will get correctly labeled by medical professionals because they'll have tests. The test will lead to an answer. The answer is one way or the other.
Well, let's, boy, I would have had some resistance to that comment. I mean, we've had teachers, teachers, and school counselors determining what second graders, how they should be labeled. And,
Mislabeling, and they're not professionals. So
right,
the
right.
teacher isn't self gets to label, and it isn't professional institutional in that regard. It's professional institutional on 2 plus 2 equals 4, or don't end a sentence with a preposition.
Well, in my world, it's not necessarily cut and dried. I don't care how somebody wants to label themselves. But Scott, if you tell me you're a unicorn, which I have no problem with you labeling yourself as a unicorn, I'm just not going to recognize it.
Right, but
But
is
I,
is is that fair to a person with a biological condition? I'm
no,
just kind of theoretically asking.
I wonder. We're asking society to bend to this and that, and let's be politically correct, and
Well, no, I
let's.
mean, for example, I know a person who has XX and XY chromosomes,
I do too. I do too.
and they were identified female at birth, and their body declared war on them when they hit puberty, and they started using testosterone to try to stop the war because they weren't digesting any food, they had horrific migraines, et cetera, et cetera, and testosterone made it work, and their physical problems got a lot better. And so they went from identified female at birth to intersex male. They don't even call themselves transsexual because they're not transitioning anywhere. This is where they are on the spectrum.
I, you know,
And so they haven't gotten surgeries. They're not doing anything other than getting medical treatment for a biological condition. And in many worlds, including the political world, they no longer exist.
I think that's a pretty that's a broad generalization. I can celebrate that they got the help that they needed, but I don't.
But now
I
they
don't.
can't get
They can't get a what?
a passport
Why not?
because they had to change their names to catch up to their biology.
Well, okay, so they went to
They
court.
weren't they were assigned female at birth. AFAB is the acronym.
Well, that's
Assigned
fine.
female at birth.
That's fine.
Doctor slaps you on the ass and says you're a girl or
I
a boy.
understand that. I understand that.
Right.
They go to court and legally change their name,
Correct.
which they're allowed to do. And I
Correct.
apparently today's laws are you have to be identified on your passport as you were on your birth certificate. That must be the case. And if you want to,
It wasn't. It isn't the case. It's a policy determination by people who aren't experts in biology, who are making a decision to label people based on their political needs, not based on any sort of factual professional basis.
well, I'd have to know who that person was that was making that decision. And I would suggest to my friend, I'm happy that they've gotten the help they need. I'm happy that they identify as a male. And if they want a passport under today's guidelines, I would suggest they get it as a female.
But
You're,
they can't because they already have changed their name and changed their birth certificate, and everything else is already caught up. And the passport was approved last month in December. It was like the passport's on its way. And now
okay.
today it's like the passport's not on its way, and it won't be on its way.
Well, they have a problem.
Indeed they do.
They, so,
But the problem is caused by a person who's not a biological expert, not a doctor, deciding that certain groups of people can't exist because they don't politically want them to exist. Not because they don't exist, they exist.
well, it may not be that deep. It could be just as simple as somebody not wanting to create a new box or do any additional work than they have to, which we do know bureaucrats are famous for that.
Indeed, but none of the above has always worked pretty well, right?
Well, yeah, I'll do nothing. I will ignore it. And I do believe that modern society will help that person.
Well, when it catches up and there's some, I mean, I don't want to go into social justice because that's a whole other form of labeling, right?
Right.
But if somebody's been given a short stick by inappropriate labeling, then at some level somebody's got to be paying attention to that and say, hey, we need to be accurate.
Well, and my advice to that friend that, is having that labeling issue and passport issues is to call their congressman at the Washington office and ask to meet with them next time they are in district.
Nice. I'll throw that out.
I've accomplished a lot by utilizing, the people that we tend to not have respect for, whether they're United States senators, United States Congress people, to get to the bottom of things. Ask them to research why this is an issue. Ask for that congressional office to advise you what to do. Now they've had to buy into it. Now they have a
And
bit
you're
of,
as a constituent, they're gonna ideally take up your cause
well,
if they believe it's a fair cause.
there's something called effective notification, and it works really well with politicians. And you say, Congresswoman, Congressman, Congress, I don't know, whatever you want, whatever the label they require. And I'll say, I'm effectively notifying you that I'm having this problem, and I'm asking your office to intervene. And what happens is that legislator will assign somebody in their office to work on that issue for you, and they'll run it up the
Nice.
flagpole.
Nice.
And if it's an underling in a bureaucratical federal department, they don't want their bosses being contacted by a United States congressman, a United States senator, and that's what happens.
Yeah, there is a little. It's always talk to the managers. Not always is usually a pretty good option.
Well, I'll give you an example. In our local community, there was a husband and wife that embezzled about $130,000 from a impoverished local little league.
Ouch.
And none of the local officials, law enforcement, agency attorneys wanted to get involved in it. So we went to the state, and there was a state assigned attorney that got involved and got it stirred up. So it was going well, and finally, as it was getting time they were going to court, they pled guilty. A local official, well, let's just say the head of probation at that time, decided that they were just going to let them have probation. This was grand theft larceny from a nonprofit. And I heard that and I couldn't believe it. So I called that probation official and asked what that was all about. Well, we just didn't have time to put any more energy into it. And the state official was like all upset. So what did I do? I wrote a letter to the governor's office, to the two U.S. attorney or senators for the state, to the congressman. I forget who else I wrote it to. The state attorney general wrote these letters asking them to
Wait, wait,
intervene.
wait. For the group, you should probably explain what writing a letter actually is.
You just put down a few salient facts and say, I'm concerned about this. I believe this letter was, I believe there's misjustice. Um,
And this is actually a piece of paper, right?
yes, absolutely. And so I send those off, and by gosh, they all had to get involved. And by gosh, that person went to prison as they should. Both of them did,
As
and as they should. And the only problem is that head of probation is a very powerful person in the county, and we'll always remember who did that. But it was the right thing to do.
Yep.
And if you need that passport, just put the facts on paper and let them sort it out for you. You don't have to be emotional. You don't have to talk about your childhood. You don't have to talk about how you identify. You just tell them what the problem is and how it's affecting you and request some help, some guidance, some advice,
Nice.
and stay after them.
And so that cheaper probation had a labeling problem, obviously, with grand theft felony.
Well, and there were other people we knew were involved. We just, it's a small community, and they just
Right? Yeah.
didn't want to put their friends in jail.
No. Yeah. Oh, that in small communities and maybe in larger ones too, that becomes problematic.
Well, one thing I learned when we moved to the small community, all communities have corruptions. Big communities, small communities, but small communities don't care to hide it. It's just the way we do things.
It may be harder to hide because larger communities have so much. It's like a tornado. There's like a million things flying through the air, and small communities don't have that. They're not as able to kind of hide behind the chaos.
Right. And they just don't have time. And it's maybe because we're, in a small community, you wear a lot of hats and you're busy.
Yeah, yeah. And that's there's a labeling thing because if you have certain titles like elected official,
Hmm.
then there are some at least some expectations from my high school civics class that you're going to have some greater service desire and personal integrity, and and that isn't always a guarantee.
No, and sometimes you have to encourage them to do their job. And, if you feel you've been wronged by the government, by a government agency, ask for intervention.
I was the kind and gentle government agency manager. Whenever somebody came to me with a problem, I'm like, okay, even if even if you're like this is a total left field thing, I'm going to try and get you the service that you should be getting from a taxpayer funded organization.
Well, yeah, but you're you're a lot you're better than that, Scott, because you actually care. You actually cared to help people, and sadly, that's become a pretty rare commodity out there these days.
I would drive by lettuce fields on the way to work, and I'd see those people picking lettuce, and I'd say, you know what, their taxpayer money is going into my pocket today. I need to be at the top of my game because they're working really hard for not very much, and we're taking a nice slice of it, and it's coming to me, and it's going into my bank account. It's paying my bills. I need to earn it.
Well, that could be, but these days, some of those field workers are making substantial livings, if they can be here legally.
You
And
know what? It's not as good as it was when it was unionized. I'll say that. I had friends who were upper middle class people working lettuce fields because they were making over $20 an hour in the union, and they retired and quit and found other things to do as unions began to get dissolved. So I don't know if people are making a lot of bucks now. I'm not that friends with that many people, but if they are, good.
yeah, I think if they have all the paperwork, the field workers are a in demand commodity.
And indeed, that may be more true than it ever has been for a while. Which means, of course, my food bill is going to go up.
Well, yeah, it will, and that's for a lot of reasons, but it's certainly not the field workers' fault that the food bill went up, and it never
No,
has
no.
been.
But when the cost of production goes up, then the cost of the product goes up.
Yeah, absolutely. And
The people who own the fields aren't going to take a smaller cut.
well, they're not, and now we have heat strokes in the fields and things like that that they never had 30 years ago. Now we provide cooling centers and cooling shades. If any of the field workers are having any issues, and as they should have, but we're still losing field workers. So
God, California and all those darn regulations. Who needs to take a 20-minute break when it's 115 degrees outside? Come on.
you know they
What's
never
going on with that?
they never needed to do that, Scott. I mean, when I was a child playing Little League Baseball in Phoenix at 8 years old in the summertime, they wouldn't let us drink water in a 3-hour practice.
Well,
But
no, until kids started dropping dead, and then
that we didn't
they got
drop
rid.
dead. We didn't know. What they gave
But some
us.
eventually did, right? I mean, I lost
Apparently,
a friend. I lost a friend on the football team.
apparently.
Everybody loved him, and he was doing two a days, and then he wasn't doing two a days, and then he was in the hospital, and then he was dead.
Well,
And then they started saying, you know what, we need to make sure your salt intake's okay, make sure you're getting drink breaks, and there was a whole bunch of regulation that came in behind it to try to ensure. The NFL today said that because they've gone all crazy on their concussion protocols, that this is the lowest year of concussions ever, and it's down 17% from last year. So
well,
they feel like they're doing good by being very very careful in terms of what they do when they see helmet to helmet contact.
and I think that's good. And I think they took there was no stigmatism to having a concussion, so the players feel a lot better about bringing that stuff to the attention. But we go back to my little league days. They did give us salt tablets. So anyway, it's not that we were sweating because it was a dry heat.
It's what I and now I tell my doctor, well, it's not high blood pressure, it's all those damn salt tablets they gave me when I was a kid.
Well, there you go. Label. You should label those people. Those salt tablet
Right.
bastards.
Giving you stuff without having the knowledge and background about why it's you maybe not want to have that much salt.
Well, yeah, but as a species, we've evolved, and we've evolved in some areas and devolved in others. So, when I put,
Process, right?
yeah, it's just part of the process. But we need to be vigilant and be aware and try and make it better. Kudos to the NFL.
Yeah. And so, to get back to labeling, it's this middle zone that's the hardest zone because it's really almost necessary for us to classify stuff. That's humans do that. That's how we keep track of things. But if we're misclassifying, or if we're classifying to be mean, then that's probably not our best spot.
No, absolutely. You and I put in the same label. You and I are an acquired taste. I don't know. I don't know if that's good or bad. I certainly don't mean anything offensive by that.
Yeah. No, one of my heroes in literature was a person whose was being tracked by the CEA on a mauve card, and it was mauve because they weren't red and they weren't blue, and purple was too dark, and they couldn't read the card for 4 years, and he got away with all sorts of stuff. So they like, so in their government insight, they said, "Oh wait, purple's too dark a color." When they mixed red and blue, and so they turned it to mauve. And so I try to honor not being trapped by an ideology, because I see that they use labels, they use fear, they use a lot of things to try and grab us.
Well, they,
And then I'm like, okay, you're trying to grab me. That's a red flag already.
well, then it's we need to encourage people to develop a perception and a perspective of how this actually really impacts them.
Oh, absolutely. And when we're talking back about information, to pull it up to labels, lots of the information we're given has a lot of labels in it. And so you have to begin to sort out whether or not those labels are designed to misinform or designed to create an emotional reaction, or both, that gets you to buy into, you know, get you to drink whatever Kool-Aid they're offering you, and make up your mind that you're going to be a good evaluator of labeling. Anytime you see a label, you know, I'll give you a grocery store example. Let's step out of the world of politics. I really try to be low carb. My body works a lot better if I'm not carved up. And so I go to stores, and every other package has keto written on it. Hey, we're keto happy. We're keto nice. We're keto vibing. All of, and then you pick up the label and you look at it and you say, your serving size is a half a teaspoon.
Exactly.
I'm gonna eat a cup of this stuff, and I'm gonna get blown into like sugar space. Or your ratio of carbs to protein to everything else isn't really keto friendly. It's lower carb than some things, but it's not at all conducive to maintaining a low carb lifestyle. And that's the labeling problem. It's like they labeled it, and if I just believed their labeling, I would not do very well in terms of trying to eat, because a lot of the stuff they're trying to sell me is yummy.
Well, some of it, and some of the, and heart healthy, and a lot of products were stripped of those labels because they were misleading. But you take something like sugar-free pudding, and you read that label, and I've read labels going back to when I was an athlete, and I noticed one day that there was 8 grams of protein in a little sugar-free pudding cup, and I wondered, where the hell is that protein coming from? Well, it was coming from soy protein. Is that what you want to be putting in your body? Well, you can, but that was a nice little boost of protein. It's just like,
Yeah, indeed it was. And what I've learned about soy over my life is that your best soy is fermented soy.
right,
And if it's not fermented, it isn't as good for your body because your body doesn't process it as well.
right. Well, but it's just labels are playing a major role in our life these days. And we need to
Yeah.
be careful how we throw them around, particularly when we're throwing them at somebody.
Oh yeah, yeah. I would say that's, it's like if I could filter myself in real life, which is eternally a struggle, that would be one. That would be right up there with not interrupting somebody when they're trying to tell you something. As like, just don't do that. Just put on the brakes.
Well, I was offended as by a label that I got quite often in my early adulthood. People would say that I was an asshole, and I would say that's not fair. I'm just sensitive.
I'd say, well, I do have one, but it's really a very small part of me. It's a regular workout, but
But it's just, I wish there were some. I think we all need to be better at putting people in groups and feeling the need to tell them how they should be labeled. Some of them are
well, and
comical.
they are. They're comical in their inaccuracies sometimes.
Well, the funniest comedian in my lifetime was George Carlin. Now, you didn't want to go see George Carlin if you didn't have some thick skin, because he was
If
gonna.
because he was going to get everyone.
Yes, yes.
Everyone in the room was going to get got.
Well, and from a very intelligent man. Now, Don Rickles, on the other hand, was just offensive, but people
Yeah,
enjoyed
yeah.
them.
He did vulgar really well.
Yeah, and he did it so well that at the end of all of his routines, he did 5 minutes of thanking everybody and assuring everybody that he loved them, and I think he did. He just had found a way to make money out of being offensive.
Yeah, yeah, absolutely. He was that guy at that upper middle class party in the 1950s that had too many martinis, and everybody knew that person, and so when he went into that act, everybody was like, "Oh yeah, 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 I know this guy."
Yeah, yeah, but and maybe we should consider trying to toughen up society a little back in that direction. To not be so sensitive.
I personally, I think that's really important. I mean, ultimately, if I took umbrage at any time I felt like I was misclassified, I'd spend a lot of time in Umbrageville. And is that really where I want to be?
No, absolutely, absolutely, and you're intelligent enough to recognize that. Particularly if you were mislabeled.
Well, because I just turn to them and say, "Hey, I'm rubber and you're glue, and it bounced off me and it sticks to you."
Na na
End of
na na
argument.
na 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 na
End
na
of
na.
argument.
Uh, but we had and thanks to your father, we had the chance to grow up with the song Signs. Because everywhere
Right.
is a sign.
And that is every word is representative of something in that we see in our reality. And that's how humans evolved into communicating animals. I mean, that's the system we ended up using. Dogs smell each other's butts and they get all this information. They don't really have to have a conversation.
Well, yeah.
But humans needed words, and so words evolved, and it's just a matter of respecting that the word dog isn't the German Shepherd that's about to bite you in the butt. That the real thing isn't the word, and the word isn't the real thing, and so you have to take words with a grain of salt
I agree. And
or a salt tablet if
you're
it's hot.
so yeah. No water. Sit in a sauna forever. No water. You'll be fine. You'll be fine. Okay, give us some coping skills.
So
I'm sensitive, and people won't let me won't respect my need for them to address me the way I want to be addressed.
then what a person says or thinks about you isn't more important than what you know you are.
Absolutely. Absolutely.
And that's a boundary, it's a wall, it's just a matter of fact. And so whenever anybody says anything pejorative to you, you don't have to own it. And this could be a person in authority too. I mean, parents do this to kids really easy, and it's just we're careless with it. And if that happens, it happens, but it's not real and it's not true. And unless you let it get under your skin and affect you, now you've given them power over you. You've made it true yourself by letting it in the door. So there are going to be hateful people in our lives.
Well,
It's just an unfortunate reality.
maybe I was blessed with parents that toughened me up as a child because I would hear comments like, "I can't believe how stupid you are." And I grew up in that atmosphere, but I knew it was always loving. So I
Yeah,
never,
didn't get a lot of that. I get head slapped a couple times.
well, so did I, but I needed to be head slapped because I might say something that might offend somebody.
Yeah, there's different ways of raising kids, and kids will turn out successfully a lot of different ways that you raise them,
Yes,
right?
yes, yes.
So, but I think even if you're a kid, if somebody says something that feels hurtful or feels not true or feels judgmental, and it doesn't match the initial test, the initial test is going to be: is this good advice? Am I being an asshole? Am I? Because it's possible that I'm being an asshole. And if I'm being an asshole and somebody just told me that, it's like somebody telling you got, like a big booger in your nose. And you want to thank them because nobody else told you. And you were walking around with a booger in your nose and people were going, oh man, that person has some real self-care problems.
Well,
You know,
no, no,
so
no.
so that's the initial test, right? If somebody says something that feels that way, then you can say, hey, I need to self-examine for a minute. Just take a deep breath. And if it's true, then thank that person. And if it feels false, or if it feels pushed, or if it feels like they're just being defensive and being angry in their own heads, then just let it go. This is an angry person being an angry person. They were, somebody was angry to them, and now they're putting it forward, and I don't have to own it.
Well, that's right. And, another perspective is it's just a pity their parents were excited when they learned how to talk.
One of the evil tricks that I'll do is, as a person who was hanging out with therapists a lot, one of the evil tricks I'll do is I'll lean in and say, "Oh, you sound like you're really angry about something. Is there something I can do to help you?"
No, exactly.
And with a real patronizing tone. I mean, if you don't grab the patronizing tone, you missed it.
Oh, I've done that too. Is everything all right in your life? You seem to be
Yeah, yeah,
projecting.
exactly.
Well, you and I both do that naturally. We learned it somewhere, so it's
Well,
probably in
but
our.
and sometimes that'll actually work with a person. They'll be like, they'll take a deep breath and say, oh, I don't know, I was just having a bad day. And then again, if somebody calls you an asshole, you can self-examine, and it may be true.
Yeah, it may, but I like to be consider myself sensitive. Identify
And then
as sensitive.
I one of the things I would say in terms of lessons potentially learning here is that we don't have to hang on to identities quite as tightly as sometimes we do. And I don't want to be defined by my identities.
Right.
I don't want to be Scott the left-handed Gemini. I want to be able to be who I need to be in the moment. And that may be left-handed, and that may be Gemini. There's nothing wrong with those things. But if I get stuck to things, and that's so important that I can't deal with the rest of the world because I don't feel like my identity is being validated, that can be limiting. That I could be building a little prison.
Well, you can, and even when we went to parochial school, they would line us up by height. What kind of trauma and damage were they doing to us then?
They lined us up by good looking. I'm
Yeah.
still outside the class.
Yeah, you're still waiting to get in, right?
Yeah.
But we grew up with senses of humor, which is good. It helps us, and I think you've given us some good advice, Scott. And it's just something we all need to work on.
Sense of humor is not such a bad add-on here. Thank you for pointing that out, because being able to just like blow stuff off and laugh at it, to realize that life is really performance art. It's like you're Lucille Ball, and life is like the Lucy show playing out around you. And if you can't laugh at it, then it's going to roll over you pretty hard.
Well, I've learned in certain conversations that something might be said to me that I consider not the brightest comment that I've heard, and I can't laugh at them because that's offensive. But
Right? No, no, well,
what
because
I
you're
do do, but what I do
demeaning
do,
them.
but what I do do is I go, is that really how you look at it? and, and that's their moment to jar their brain and to,
So explain to me, how did you get to this point?
no, I don't want to know that.
I
That's
want the backstory. You have to be a
no,
really
no,
backstory about why you believe this.
no. That backstory is not going to be any better than the moronic comment. And I don't mean to offend anybody out there that might say something stupid from time to time, which I will judge them. But I don't call
Yeah.
them stupid. I don't label them stupid.
I pride myself on being able to say stupid things occasionally. I think that that's an important part of being a normal human being.
I agree.
And I want to be a normal human being really badly. I've been striving my whole life for that. So
Well, I think any of us that have a semblance of intelligence, and I believe everybody does, we say things from time to time that get out of our mouth and we go, "Oh, why did I say that?"
all right, let me close on this one. So I actually posted this on social media this morning. I woke up this morning with this odd feeling in me. And I said, you know what? I want to die with like an 8.0 Richter scale irony moment. I said, I want to have a Widowmaker heart attack and have my final thought be, what the absolute hell? I've been taking fish oil my whole life.
You're not going to go softly into the night.
I would appreciate. I realize this is kind of weird, but I would appreciate that because it would be like, isn't this the perfect tie up to to what you thought you were doing? Everything got derailed. Like you thought you had this, you thought you had this completely under control. You've been taking large amounts of fish oil since you were like 12 years old, and thunk, end of game.
Well, you know, I adored the
You can cry at
song.
my funeral. That would be okay.
I adored the song as a child. I still adore it. Was Peggy Lee's "Is That All There Is"? Did your dad produce that? He should have.
It was a little bit before his time. He probably played. He was a DJ when that was happening, so I bet you he spun it a few times.
Yeah, oh, absolutely. And that song was all about perception, just like Signs. So I'm glad. One thing, Scott, no matter what we accomplished today, you brought Signs back to my memory. So that was a good moment in time.
Oh man, it was a good song.
All
And
right,
that
man.
was his first one. And I didn't like some of the songs he got gold records for. I was like, whatever. That song, I was like, I'd been singing it that whole summer.
And did anybody react to you singing it?
I've got kind of a reedy voice, but I stay in tune. So
Okay. Okay.
I never really got much peer pressure to shut up.
Well, they were afraid you might shut up and start thinking devious thoughts.
Let's not do that,
All right.
especially especially on public, right?
All right. All right, everybody. Hey, thank you, Scott. I want everybody to know this has been Justin Case and Scott bringing you American Consciousness. Thanks for joining us. Remember, additional information and links are provided in this video as read more. Today is the day to subscribe to this channel. Please learn more about labels and Scott Dudley when time permits.